So with that, we better move on and learn about some more awesome hyperconvergent solutions. I'm excited to introduce Mr. Arjun Narang. He's a technical marketing engineer at Maxta. Are you there, Arjun?
Yeah, hey David, how's it going?
Great. Thanks for joining us. Take it away.
Thanks for having us, David. So my name is, as David mentioned, my name is Arjun Narang, and I'm at Maxta, and I want to spend the time today to tell you about how Maxta Hyperconvergence is going to give you a simple, agile, and efficient solution for your data center. So let's start with those three key bullet points there: simple, agile, and efficient. So what do we mean by simple? Maxta's hyper-converged storage platform is going to allow you to manage your VMs and not your storage. So no more configuring LUNs, no more setting up iSCSI networking. Everything is now done at a VM level, getting rid of that kind of storage management overhead that you used to have to worry about. When we talk about agility, Maxta is a very flexible solution, meaning that you can deploy it on different server vendors, getting the x86 server vendor of your choice. Also, you can run it on different hypervisors, whether that be VMware, KVM, or others. So you're going to get that kind of flexibility and agility to really deploy in the method that best suits your environment's needs. And finally, efficient. Maxta is going to provide you with all the enterprise class data services that you get and expect from your traditional storage solutions, all while doing it at a much lower cost with maximizing your OpEx and CapEx savings with that reduced hardware footprint in your data center, and also the reduced management overhead with, again, everything being done at this VM level with that efficiency. So as a company, Maxta has received strong backing from investors such as Andreessen Horowitz, Intel Capital, and Tenaya Capital. We've also had strong industry recognition from analysts such as Gartner with their Cool Vendors Award, in addition to CRN and Red Herring. Now, when Maxta goes to market, there are two different ways that you can get the solution in your hands. The first is a software-defined storage, what we call MXSP, or the Maxta Storage Platform. This is the software solution that we deliver. You can leverage your existing hardware and just deploy that software and get the aggregated storage resources with the enterprise class contract. So your server is coming from somebody, your switch is coming from somebody else, and the storage array is coming from now a third vendor. You have to renew these different hardware components during different time cycles. So you have to manage all these various components from a cost perspective. Then also from an OpEx perspective, you have this kind of management overhead where you need to have a virtualization expert in your data center. You need to have a compute expert to manage the servers. You need a networking expert. And you also need a storage expert. And all of these experts are operating in their own silos, dealing with their own components. You're also not going to have much flexibility, right? As we talked about, everything is kind of isolated, and you don't get to refresh these components until you hit those hardware refresh cycles. So when there is finally, some technological advancement in your storage array, you have to wait until you hit that renewal cycle at maybe that 5-year period, running your old hardware for such a long time because you don't want to have to pay for that new hardware when you still have the existing infrastructure in your environment. And then finally, if you look at the performance question, there's an issue here with, again, having these kind of, disparate different components in your data center where you want to scale your compute resources, but what do you do on the storage backend to meet those new compute resource needs? You can't just scale everything together at once, or, you're also tied into this idea where, hyperconvergence in Maxta specifically is really going to allow you to fit your hardware requirements to the exact needs of your VMs and applications. So if we look first at just the basics of what hyperconvergence is going to do to this complex picture on the left-hand side, we're going to remove all of that networking and storage infrastructure, and we're actually just going to use the local SSD and spinning disk capacity to provide you with commodity hardware running your flash and disk capacity, giving you the SSD as that flash tier and the spinning disk as your capacity tier. So you're investing a little bit on the flash to get that performance, and you're going cheap and deep on the spinning disk to give you that maximum storage capacity. Now, when we talk about scalability, this is where it kind of Maxta's software-defined approach really comes in and provides some unique benefits here, where you can both scale up or scale out. So what do we mean by scale up? Let's say you need, 1 more terabyte of storage. Your file server has grown over time, and you need an additional terabyte of capacity to support that growth. you can actually just go ahead and add a single spinning disk to any server in your cluster. And then as we'll show in the demo, you can actually go into Maxta's UI and just click Add Disk, and we'll automatically add that capacity to your Maxta storage pool, and we'll automatically redistribute data on the back end so that you have this even distribution of all of your data across all the storage capacity in your cluster. Now, say instead of just adding 1 terabyte to one server in your cluster, you want to add a terabyte to every server in the cluster. You can also go ahead and do that, and again, just add all of those disks to your Maxta storage pool. And then, of course, if you're looking at a few more months or years down the road, and you're saying, hey, beyond the web server and all this, now all of a sudden maybe we want to bring in VDI into our infrastructure. So not only do I need additional storage, but I'm also going to need compute, and I want to scale out by adding both of these resources at the same time. So with Maxta, you can simply add one of those fully configured hyperconverged appliances to your cluster and dynamically grow that environment to support those new applications. And of course, with all of this, you've kind of seen, what the OpEx savings can be, where all of this management task, there's no longer a big headache when you need to add a terabyte of data to your storage pool. And that'll be even more clear when we go through the demo. You're also going to see kind of, the simplified infrastructure scalability and management, and doing everything at a VM level. So this is kind of a key point that, we'll keep hitting on throughout the presentation and also during the demo. But Maxta is going to offer you application-defined policies. So what this means is now instead of configuring your LUNs for specific RAID characteristics, you're actually going to be doing everything at the VM level, which, as we discussed, is the object that you care about in the data center today. You don't care about the storage behind it. You care about the VMs and the applications running within those VMs. Okay, so kind of 3 quick bullet points here on what makes Maxta different in the hyperconverged landscape. The first is, as we discussed a little bit already, is choice, right? So compared to a lot of the appliance vendors in the market today and the traditional storage vendors also, Maxta is a software-defined solution, meaning that you get your choice of hardware. So you can run on the server vendor of your choice rather than being tied in to only that branded proprietary appliance that another vendor may sell. You also have the ability to leverage your existing hardware with this software-defined model. The next thing, the power of the software here, is the licensing model. So Maxta's software license is fully transferable, and it's a perpetual lifetime license. So what this means is when you hit that renewal cycle where maybe your servers have aged 3 years and they've gone from Gen 1, which was available today, to Gen 2, which is available tomorrow, you want to upgrade your environment to Gen 2. And in that kind of traditional storage model, when you upgraded both your hardware and your software at the same time, and you paid the penalty for upgrading both at the same time in terms of cost. Now with Maxta, when you hit that upgrade cycle on the hardware, you just refresh the hardware, bring in the new hardware, and you're able to transfer your Maxta license onto that new hardware at no cost. So it's going to save you a significant amount of total cost of ownership there during your renewal cycles. And finally, from a technological perspective, Maxta is going to offer you those application-defined policies. So if you think about kind of traditional storage and the way that worked, you would configure a single storage pool or maybe multiple LUNs, but each of those individual storage pools would have maybe separate characteristics, if that was even possible in that storage through that storage vendor. With Maxta, we're going to, again, remove that concept of defining LUNs and defining characteristics on a per LUN basis and bring everything up to the VM level. So compared to some vendors where you only get, a single block size and a single replication factor for your entire storage pool, Maxta is actually going to allow you to say that, hey, okay, I have my Exchange server. I want that to be running with a 32K block size and 3 replicas so that I can survive 2 failures and have the optimal performance with my application issuing 32K IOs and my storage on the back end being configured properly for those 32K IOs that are coming in. And then right next to that Exchange server running on my same Maxta storage pool, I'm going to deploy a few virtual desktops. Those virtual desktops are going to be configured with a 4K block size and only 2 copies of data. And then again, on that same storage pool, I'm going to deploy a SQL database, and that SQL database is now going to have an 8K block size. And we'll go into this a little bit more during the demo and just show you kind of how simple it is to really set all of these policies at a VM level, rather than kind of that old construct where you either only had one single set of characteristics for the entire storage pool, or you had to configure multiple storage pools and then remember which VM belongs to which LUN and which LUNs should be assigned to which host, and kind of deal with all that complex management overhead. So now if we look at kind of the different ways of going to market within Hyperconverged, we kind of see two primary methods of going to market. One is with a proprietary Hyperconverged appliance, and the other is through a software-defined storage deployment model. With the proprietary appliance, you're going to have major lock-in on the hardware side, right? You're not going to get your choice of x86 server, and you're not going to get your choice of which components go into that server from a storage perspective. Now, depending on the vendor that's delivering that HCI appliance, you may or may not get your choice of hypervisor. With software-defined storage, as it translates to hyperconvergence, you're going to get that choice on the hardware side, right, where you can pick your choice of x86 server and your storage device, although there may be some restrictions based on that vendor's HCL. But when it comes to hypervisor, most of these software-defined storage platforms for hyperconvergence are going to restrict you on the hypervisor and actually only allow you to deploy with either KVM or only on VMware or only on Hyper-V. Now, Maxta, on the other hand, with both our software-defined storage and HCI appliance known as MaxDeploy, is going to give you full choice when it comes to hardware and hypervisors. So you can pick any x86 server and you can deploy on multiple hypervisors. The only difference here, again, as we've discussed, is that with that software-defined storage MXSP model, you're going to have the ability to use your existing hardware and leverage those components that are already in your data center, deploy Maxta's software on top of it, and get that enterprise-class storage solution using the hardware that you already had in-house. With the MaxDeploy HCI appliance, you're going to get the ability to build a custom appliance to the specs that you want that meet your exact needs. So you're not just going to be constrained to this, either this 4 terabyte 64 gig appliance or that 256 gig 20 terabyte appliance. You can go anywhere in between there and really build it to meet your exact needs. And then when you already have that, you can even scale up and scale out to, again, meet the growing needs of your data center. So with that kind of gives you an idea of, what Maxta has to offer from a product perspective. So from there, I'll hop into the software demo, and we'll just, show you a little bit about how to use the product and how awesome the product is. Oh. Sorry, David, did you guys have the video there for the demo?
Yeah. Here's the video, Arjun. I'll play it now.
All right, thank you. Inside UI is our dashboard. The dashboard gives you a quick overview of the status of your cluster, including information such as health, so you know whether there have been any alerts from disk or node failures in your environment. We also show capacity usage, performance stats such as IOPS, latency, and throughput, as well as some basic inventory information regarding the number of servers, VMs, and drives in your Maxta cluster. There's also a quick access menu, which gives you an easy one-click way in which to perform some common tasks within Maxta, such as creating a VM or scaling your environment by adding disks and nodes to the cluster. For the purpose of this demo, I want to focus on two key points which we had discussed during the earlier presentation: Maxta's application-defined policies and Maxta's cluster scalability. Both of these tasks can be easily performed through MX Insight, which I'll show you now. So if we get started with creating a VM, the first few pages of the VM creation wizard are just the same characteristics you would see through the hypervisor UI. We have to provide a name for the VM, an OS type and version, and CPU and memory resources. We select a host for the VM's compute resources. We can attach an ISO as a boot disk for the VM if desired, and we can also set up any VM NIC configurations. Alright, now for the fun stuff, Maxta's application-defined policies. This page has a few policies that can be set at a VM level, and the next page, vDisk Creation, has policies that can be set on a per virtual disk or VMDK basis. The first policy you're going to see here is a number of replicas. So let's say you're looking at your mixed application environment, which has a SQL database, Microsoft Exchange, a print server, a web server, and maybe some non-persistent VDI desktops also. By default, Maxta creates 2 copies of all your data, enabling us to provide you with no downtime and no data loss when there is any single disk or node failure in the cluster. But let's say for your SQL database that you want to be able to tolerate maybe 2 disk failures. You can actually go ahead and set the number of copies for that VM to 3. And now you can tolerate those 2 failures with no downtime to the guest application, or in this case, the SQL database. Whereas for that print server, you really don't care about tolerating 2 simultaneous failures. You want to reduce the capacity usage and go ahead with just 2 copies of data for that VM. The next policy is rebuild priority. This is a number from 1 to 10, which determines the priority given to rebuilding the data associated with the VM. So when a disk or node fails in a Maxta cluster, Maxta automatically performs resync operations in order to restore the VMs to their fully highly available state. During this process, all the VMs and their associated data are put into a queue, and copies of that data are rebuilt onto the healthy disks and nodes in your cluster. So the rebuild priority actually specifies that you want a particular VM at the top of this queue so that it's restored to its fully highly available state sooner. So again, you may want to set this parameter to 10 for your SQL database so that that VM gets rebuilt very quickly and is at a lower risk of failure. But, for that print server or those non-persistent VDI desktops, which you can easily spin up again, you want to prioritize your other workloads over these rebuild tasks, so you keep the priority at maybe a 3 for those VMs. And now for some data layout policies. By default, Maxta stripes data across multiple disks and nodes in the cluster. We do this in order to create an even distribution of data and workload across all nodes in the Maxta cluster. This also provides each VM with the aggregated IOPS of multiple disks and nodes, rather than being constrained to the resources of a single node in your cluster. However, the downside of horizontal or wide striping is that reads have to travel across a network. In order to counter this, another approach to data layout is to have VM's data reside entirely within the node on which that VM's compute resources reside. This is known as vertical striping or data locality. With this model, all reads are served from the node's local disks, eliminating any potential network latency issues. However, overutilization and some of the other factors discussed earlier do become an issue. The flexibility of Maxta storage platform allows you to utilize either data layout policy depending on your application's specific needs. This contrasts to other solutions which are going to force you to stick with either horizontal or vertical striping for all of your VMs. Alright, now let's move along to the next screen here, virtual disk policies. Maxta allows you to set policies for disk size, SCSI controller, page size, read cache, and compression as shown here. You can then apply those policies to multiple virtual disks at the same time. So if we go back to the example of deploying a SQL database, the first thing you'll do is add a boot disk to install the Windows OS. For this disk, we'll just keep the default policies and the 40 gig capacity and go ahead and add that disk. Now, when it comes to adding the database disks, let's say we want to spread the SQL database across maybe 4 VMDKs, each of maybe a 200 gig capacity to give us that even stripe. We'll also want to align the storage block size with the application page size, which, from reading up some documentation on SQL databases, we've found that they send an 8K I/O, and so we'll select to have a page size of 8K also on the storage backend. If we were running Exchange, let's say, we would set this parameter to maybe 32K based on Exchange's best practices. For the SCSI controller type, I'll go ahead and follow VMware's best practices and use the VMware Paravirtual Adapter. And if I was dealing with encrypted data or maybe media files, I'd go ahead and probably disable compression to save some of that CPU overhead. So now with all these policies set, I'll go ahead and add these 4 VMDKs for the database. And the final disk you'll need for your SQL database is the transaction log. So for this one, I'll just use one disk of a 200 gig capacity, leave the 8K page size and Paravirtual controller as we discussed earlier. But now, since this is a transaction log and it's primarily used for writes, I don't really care about the read performance, so I'll go ahead and actually disable the read cache. This is going to free up space on the SSD's read cache for my other VMDKs, like the SQL database disk we just created, to utilize that space in the read cache. So now I'll add that disk and click Submit. After our VM has been created, we're automatically redirected to the Manage VM screen. From here, we have a view of all the VMs deployed to Maxta storage, whether those VMs were deployed through the hypervisor or through Maxta's UI itself. From here, we can modify all those policies that we just set. So you can see here on the existing Exchange VM, I can actually change the number of replicas. Or I can go ahead and add a new VMDK and set those same policies for page size and the others that we previously discussed. So with this, hopefully now you've seen how simple it is to optimize your storage for individual applications using Maxta's application-defined policies. Okay, and now the last thing I want to highlight during this demo is the scalability of the Maxta storage platform. As we discussed earlier, Maxta provides you with the ability to both scale up by adding compute and storage resources independently, or scale out by adding fully configured hyper-converged nodes to your cluster. So let's start with the example of scaling out. So let's say I've added a few additional applications to my environment, and now I need one more ESX host in my vCenter cluster in order to support that new application. So I'll go through VC, add that ESX host to my cluster, and then come into Maxta's MX Insight Manage Hosts tab and just click the Add Host button. We can go ahead and populate the fields with the ESXi IP address and credentials. And then select the networking to use for management and storage, as well as the disk to include for Maxta's use. Now for this demo, I'll just go ahead and cancel out of this so that we can quickly show the scale-up capabilities also. Okay, so with scale out, let's say that I've been growing the capacity usage on my file server over time, and now I just need, maybe 1 additional terabyte of capacity. So rather than having to buy a whole new hyper-converged appliance and go with the scale out method that we discussed, Maxta allows you to simply pop in a 1 terabyte drive into an open drive bay, or replace a 1 terabyte drive with a 2 terabyte drive, then come into Maxta's UI, click Add Disk for that server, and Maxta will automatically detect that there's a disk on the host which is not currently being used by Maxta, so that you can select to add that disk to your Maxta storage pool. And so hopefully this demo has helped to convey how Maxta will allow you to achieve both scale up and scale out in your environment, and also the ability to set application-defined policies at a per VM level to optimize your storage for each of your applications. All right, so hopefully that gave you guys a good idea of, just how awesome Maxta is to use and how easy it is to do the app-defined policies and also the scale up and scale out. So before we wrap things up, there are just kind of a few slides back here that I wanted to discuss, just so that you guys have an idea of, exactly now that you've seen Maxta software in action, how can you get that software in your hands? So the great news here is that Maxta recently introduced the industry's first freemium hyperconvergence model. What this means is that you can actually go to maxta.com today and download the free Maxta software. And this gives you that lifetime transferable software license that we were discussing earlier with the full functionality. So this isn't some, dumbed down trial version that's only going to give you limited capabilities. It's going to give you everything that you would get in your production environment, and it's going to give you kind of an easy way to get started with Maxta with very little upfront investment and low risk. And whenever you're ready to transition, this is a production-ready solution. So you can go from an evaluation to full production and be running on that free software if you choose, or you can also upgrade to the premium license. In addition to the software, you're also going to have access to the Maxta community. This is basically an online forum for yourself and all other users of Maxta software, where you can ask questions about the software, you can engage with other users of Maxta, and you can also ask questions to the Maxta team and get the responses from the Maxta experts themselves. And of course, as I mentioned, at any point in time, if you want to convert from the freemium version to the premium, you can go ahead and do that, and that's going to give you basically the unlimited capacity and scale up and scale out capabilities rather than the 3-node 24 terabyte limit that is enforced for freemium. And it's also going to give you a full 24/7 Maxta support. So very quickly here, kind of a feature breakdown of, truly what is the difference between freemium and premium. And you can kind of see that it's just those top 3 points around the capacity, the server limit, so 3 with freemium and unlimited with premium. Capacity limit, 24 terabytes total for your cluster with the free version versus an unlimited capacity per server with the premium version. And then the maintenance and support. So freemium is only going to be supported through that Maxta community that we talked about, whereas premium, you're going to get the 24/7 Maxta support. Otherwise, in terms of the perpetual license, the VM-centric application-defined data services and policies that we did the demo on, the snapshots and clones, the capacity optimization, all of that, the data integrity, you're going to get all of those features whether you go with the free version or the premium version. And again, at any point in time, you can always upgrade from freemium to that premium version. And so that's basically, everything we wanted to discuss today. Hopefully, you're leaving this presentation with the 3 key points of, Maxta being a simple platform where you're managing your VMs, not your storage. No more LUNs, no more iSCSI networking, everything done at the VM level. An agile storage platform with that transferable software license and the application-defined policies, as well as the flexibility in choice of both hardware and hypervisor. And finally, an efficient platform, which overall is just going to give you a significant reduction in your OpEx and CapEx, giving you much easier management and reduced costs overall for your data center. And when you log in, that wraps it up from my end. Thanks for having us, David. And if we want to do some Q&A, we can just go ahead and hop into that.
Yeah, great presentation, Arjun. Just time, I think, for just a few questions. First one is just to clarify, they're asking about hardware compatibility. So I know Maxta is software only, but is there like an HCL?
So today, basically, we run on any x86 server vendor. The only real requirements are in terms of things like your SSD to HDD ratio. So that we can optimize your SSDs for write cache, read cache, and metadata, giving you the best performance while still reducing the cost with that cheap and deep storage capacity. So that's kind of the only hardware requirements that we really have. And when you actually submit your form on Freemium, we'll go through a little bit of hardware validation with you to make sure that you have the optimal hardware to run Maxta software.
Got it. Another question here is about vSphere integration, like in the vSphere web client. Is there any sort of integration?
Yeah, so we do have a plugin into the vSphere web client. So in addition to the demo that you saw using kind of Maxta's standalone web browser UI, that same exact UI is actually plugged into the vSphere web client and will show up as another tab in your at the cluster level.
Excellent. And then I know you talked about how you can create like per VM storage, throughput policies. Kind of, how do you know what to configure per VM? Are there any sort of guidelines on that, or how can you help with
definitely.
that?
So we have some best practices, and you can definitely work with us to get that. There's also a lot of documentation. When you look at Exchange itself, Microsoft has published a lot of documentation on what's the page size and things like that, block size, to optimize for those specific applications.
Excellent. Well, I think that's all the time we have for Q&A, but there are some remaining questions in there you might want to check out from the audience. For more information, I encourage the audience to visit Maxta.com or email sales@Maxta.com or download Maxta's resource that's available there on your console. Thanks for your presentation today, Arjun.
Yeah, thank you, David.